Hi, in today's video we're going to deploy a static website on AWS using Cloudfront and a private S3 bucket. And here's a diagram of what we're going to build. We're going to use three AWS services. Route 53 for setting up a custom domain, Cloudfront is the content delivery network that will serve the website, and an S3 bucket will be used for hosting the website files. When user navigates to a domain name, we send a request which eventually finds its way to Route 53 and is matched to an alias record that points to a Cloudfront distribution. This means the request is sent to the closest edge location. At the edge location, the path pattern is evaluated and matched with a behavior. At this point, Cloudfront will run the viewer origin request Lambda that was specified before it hits the Cloudfront cache. Then two scenarios can happen. A cache hit means that the edge location already has the relevant data and can send the response straight away. During a cache miss, however, the request is sent to the Cloudfront distribution and mapped to the origin selected for the evaluated behavior. Cloudfront forwards the request to the origin, this time it's S3 bucket, and includes the credentials associated with the origin access identity. The S3 bucket policy checks the origin access identity and the permissions assigned to it. If the request is authenticated with the correct credentials and the OAI has the necessary permissions specified in the policy, then it grants access to the requested object. Otherwise, access is denied. I'm actually going to start by defining the bucket first for hosting the website files. So every bucket obviously needs to have a unique name, and then I'm going to point it to my index.html file as the entry file and the error file. For now, I'm going to make the bucket public, so I'm going to disable all the access control lists. I don't want to have any orphaned buckets once I'm done with this, so I'm going to set the removal policy to destroy and auto-delete the objects as well, which is actually going to deploy a Lambda for me and delete all the objects before attempting to remove the bucket. Then in the distribution, I need to point it to my default root object again, and because I want to use the custom domain, I'm going to have to specify that here as well. Every distribution needs a default behavior that will be used if no other behavior matched the pattern, so I'm going to point it to my S3 bucket and will redirect all the requests to HTTPS to have a secure connection. Now, because of this, I'm also going to need an SSL certificate, and because I'm using Cloudfront, I actually need to have the certificate in the US East 1 region. Okay, now it's time to redirect the request from the custom domain to the Cloudfront distribution. So I'm going to grab my hosted zone first, and I'm using my hosted zone ID and name to get the reference. And I can add an A record that's actually going to be an alias and point it to my Cloudfront distribution. I cannot use a CNAME here because I'm using the domain Apex. Now, one last thing before we can deploy this is we need to actually upload the website files to the bucket. I have this SvelteKit app prepared, so I want to point the bucket deployment to my website files. Distribution paths decide what files Cloudfront should invalidate in its cache, so just to make it simple, I'm gonna select them all. And obviously we need to specify the target bucket for the files and the distribution that will serve them. Now we can deploy this. I have a Cloudfront distribution with my domain name, and here's my little website with two sub-pages. I'll probably butcher this, but one page is Bienvenidos Amigos and a Bienvenue les Amis on another. The issue is that once I refresh it, it serves an error page which coincidentally was set as index.html, so it renders the home page despite being on the page 1 route. This is issue number 1. Now, if I go back to the console and check out the bucket items, I can actually view them with a direct link, even files that might not be made available by the website, but just happen to be in the same bucket. This also circumvents the Cloudfront cache, making it more expensive for us to serve those files, and it's issue number 2. Enter Lambda Edge. This is a special Lambda that is replicated to the edge locations, and AWS provides us with 4 events in the request's lifecycle that we can hook into and run the function. There is viewer request that we're going to use to fix the refresh issue, which runs right before hitting the Cloudfront cache. Then there is an origin request right before reaching the origin, meaning the S3 bucket in this example. Then right after the bucket responds with the file, but before saving it in the cache. And then viewer response is right before sending it to the user. So before Cloudfront even touches this request or saves it in the cache or whatever, we're going to do something to it to fix the issue with the wrong page being served after refreshing. But let's first look into the root cause of the issue. The way I like to think of it is that the domain name selects the server and the first slash marks the root directory on that server, sort of like when navigating a file system with a terminal. One difference is that we're looking for HTML files, so if the file is not specified, it's going to assume we want index.html. With this logic, when I navigate to page-1 and the file is not specified because the path does not end with an extension, it's actually going to look for a directory, page-1, with an index.html file in it. Equipped with this understanding of the problem, I can now implement my Lambda. First case I'm going to handle is the homepage, which does not require any changes, so I'm just going to return the request as is. Otherwise, I want to append the .html extension to the path to specify the file. This won't work for every case just yet, because if I go back to the HTML file, there are some additional requests made both in the form of HTML tags as well as dynamic import statements in JavaScript. All these requests will be made from the browser once it reaches those lines when parsing the file, so it will go into the same Lambda function, and right now it will append the .html extension to each of those files. To remedy this, I'm going to check if the path is looking in the _app directory or if it ends with an extension of any kind. So just to simplify this, we're only going to look for a dot and some letters after that. This is obviously a highly dependent on your build output, so this code will probably not work with any other build that is not SvelteKit. So it's important to understand the source of the problem so you can implement your own solution. Now, to create the Lambda resource, I'm going to use the experimental Edge Lambda construct. It's been experimental for years now, and the API didn't change as far as I know, so it's safe to use, I think. I'm pointing it to the directory where my Lambda is located, and then pointing to the actual handler by providing the file and function names with a dot notation. I also want to limit the log retention period so I don't end up with a bunch of stale log groups cluttering up CloudWatch. And one last thing is to actually attach it to a Cloudfront behavior and select the event that should trigger it. That is it for the Edge Lambda, so we can move on to Origin Access Identity. Now I want to make sure that the only way to reach my bucket is through Cloudfront. So I'm going to create an Origin Access Identity and grant it permissions to the bucket and then assign it to the Cloudfront origin as well. With this out of the way, I don't actually need to have a public bucket anymore, so I'm going to disable public access and comment out this code block, and I can deploy the changes now. Okay, I forgot that the Edge Lambda needs to have the region explicitly defined, so I'm just going to add this real quick and deploy again. Keep in mind that the Edge lambdas are always created in the US East 1 region if you want to look it up in the console. Okay, the bucket is now completely private, but it also has a new bucket policy to grant access to the origin access identity user. And if I try to access any file in the browser, it should show me the access denied. And it does. Now, if I go to my website, it actually shows me the same error. Now, why is that? Let's go to the CloudFront distribution and check the origin configuration. The origin access identity is not actually used anywhere, and there is no way of assigning it to the origin. That's because OAI cannot be used on a bucket's website endpoint, and which is what's selected right now, but if I change it to the bucket itself, the form changes and I can choose an OAI under legacy access identities. It then disappears again if I enable the recommended website endpoint. OAI is the legacy option since introducing origin access control, but it is sufficient for this example. So I'm going to save this change and see if it worked. Yeah, I need to invalidate CloudFront cache first. Okay, it works. Let's see how to make these changes in the CDK, because if you remember, there was no property that would enable static website hosting on the bucket explicitly, and yet it was turned on. This is the feature of the website index document property, which once set, it enables the website hosting. All we've got to do is remove these two properties and the origin will use the assigned bucket instead of the website URL. Now, tearing down this infrastructure is actually a little bit different because we're using Lambda Edge, which is replicated to multiple locations. So in order for us to remove it, it has to remove all the copies of itself from the edge locations, and it's only going to start doing that once it's not being used anymore. In this case, we can just delete the stack with the distribution, and then after some time, it could be half an hour, it could be an hour, the Edge Lambda stack should be ready to be deleted. So to sum up, we've covered how to deploy a static website on AWS using CloudFront and S3. We have also covered how to use a custom domain with SSL in CloudFront, and then we went over how to protect our assets by ensuring that the user can only access it via the CloudFront distribution by using origin access identity. We have also covered some issues that could come up, issues with website file path not matching the URL, which we fixed using a custom Lambda Edge, and then an issue with origin access identity that is not being assigned to the origin because, as it turns out, it cannot be used with the bucket website URL. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching.